Welcome to this interview that I'm having with a journalist and a theologian on the grooming gangs of the United Kingdom and then atrocities that are happening with women and girls across the world in places like Azerbaijan, in Nigeria, in Egypt and other parts of the world. This whole series is going to be looking at women and in Islam. And we're starting by an interview with Sonja Dahlmans. Welcome, Sonja.
Thank you for having me back.
It's a delight to have you on this little series of Women in Islam. I've followed a lot of your articles for years and on X and so on. I'm often just sort of, oh, what is she posted recently? And found it incredibly helpful, and also incredibly helpful how you have a wide knowledge of what is happening around the world, primarily to do with women and girls in Islam and how it's affecting Christian communities. I know you have a real interest in the persecuted church and how Islam is interacting with the church, especially when it comes to women and girls. I wondered if you could just maybe introduce yourself, what you do, what your interests are, before we sort of go into the actual details of women in Islam.
Yes, well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. As you said, I'm a theologian. I specialized in the early church, New Testament, early church. My thesis was actually on the sexual violence of Christian female martyrs. And I connected that with some of the things that we will speak about today. So what is happening to Christian women all over the world who are being abducted and forced to marry and forced to convert, almost always to Islam. So forced Islamization. So that is what I specialized in, what my thesis research was on. And I just recently also submitted a master thesis in Islam on the subject of child marriage, and the not necessarily claiming that child marriage is only an Islamic problem, but for my studies in Islam, so what are the theological foundations for child marriage under Islam? And that also is about what happens to minor girls from religious minorities, non-Muslim religious minorities who are forced to convert to Islam, such as in Pakistan or Nigeria, for example.
What got you interested in this particular topic? Because it's a tough topic, and just really interesting to know what really made you go deep and detailed into this area of study.
First, it's been a difficult road.
Yes,
Can
you imagine?
It took me 2.5 years to actually find a professor willing to supervise my thesis. They were trying to make me choose another subject. And I stood my ground. That has been difficult. But what interested me was the fact that nobody spoke about it. And then I'm intrigued. That's just part of my character. But also because when I was recovering from a car accident, I felt that I was called. When I watched the late Nabil Qureshi,
Yes.
he said that, if you want to do what I do, so what he was doing at the time, he unfortunately passed away at a very young age.
He was a Muslim who became a Christian.
Right.
And
Yes.
he asked questions of Islam, didn't he?
Yes.
And so on.
And he was always very gentle. He always was ready to answer, as the Bible says. But yeah, he did some videos in which he said, if you want to do what I do, get an education. So it's when I started studying theology. And he says, you need to understand your calling. So we all have a different calling, right? So what is my calling may not be yours, but I need to understand what the Lord has called me to do, to make the most of that, to be fruitful.
And certainly the articles I've read that you've written, I mean, you are dealing with atrocities against minority Christian groups in places like Azerbaijan and Nigeria and other parts of the world. And it's definitely a calling to stay the course and to honesty write about things, in some ways write about topics that other journalists are not really writing about. And with your theological background, both as a Christian and someone interested in studying Islam as well, I think you bring something to the table that perhaps others may miss, because you are also a religious-minded person. You understand the mind of a religious person, although it is very different, of course, to Islam. I wondered if you could just share a little bit about the situation. Let's start with Azerbaijan. That's an area that you know a lot about. And I would love to just know a little bit of what's happening on the ground, what has happened, and what are the things that we're not being told that you have discovered.
Yeah, well, that's a very tricky one indeed, because it all very often boils down to money. And Azerbaijan is, since the Ukrainian-Russian war, the West decided not to buy gas from Russia anymore. So now they're buying that from Azerbaijan. And actually, Ursula von der Leyen is very high up in the European Commission, isn't she?
Mhm.
She actually called Mr. Aliyev from Azerbaijan her trustworthy partner, as
Interesting.
opposed to Mr. Putin from Russia. Well, this trustworthy partner of the European Union has a history of Christian persecution. And there's a lot of other human rights violations, but Christian persecution of the Armenians in Azerbaijan, most definitely. And this is something that was planned. So before they, in the September 2023, finally ethnically cleansed 120,000 indigenous people who were living there for 3,000 years, before the country Azerbaijan even existed,
Yeah.
Armenians were already there. But before this, he and his father, before him, he's the successor of his father, they have started a campaign of connecting an Azerbaijani identity with the religion of Islam. So to be,
Sounds a bit like Turkey.
yes, so
Yeah.
to be a good Azerbaijani, you're a Shia Muslim.
Mm.
And they deny, and they have successfully denied and destroyed the Christian Armenian heritage in the country, which they now claim is Azerbaijani. In their history books, in their school textbooks, in government campaigns, everywhere, they deny the existence of Armenians in the country. This is how it started. Then they blocked the part of Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh in Armenian, and they deprived people of basically food and medical supplies for almost 10 months. And then finally, in September 2023, they ethnically cleansed people.
What happened to the women and children?
When you, for example, see the Exodus, so when you see all the Armenian Christians leaving the country that their ancestors, built alive, they have to stop at the border. And soldiers with, armed soldiers, big rivals, are giving candies to the children. They're supposed to stop and get out of the car, and they need to, some sort of a ceremony to pretend pretend Azerbaijanis are good people, they're not harming you. They have to take pictures while these people wear guns, and children having to take the candy and smile in the camera. That was sick. But even worse is that Azerbaijani people, so not necessarily the government or soldiers, but just random Azerbaijani people on social media, were offering money to, and I quote, "get me a hot Armenian girl so she can taste some Azeri DNA."
Yeah. Wow.
So implying that they will rape her.
Yeah.
They were showing pictures of Armenian women and saying that they would rape them. They would also say this about children, Armenian children. So it was disgusting. I have no other word for it. It was disgusting. And there was even when they were fighting a few years before, they raped an Armenian woman, a mother of three, I think, a soldier. And then they cut off her fingers and they put her fingers in her mouth of her dead corpse, and then took a picture of that and showed that around in public, trying to humiliate, shaming her even more after death. So these are the things that have been happening. And they obviously, for the Armenian population inside Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh, but also in the country Armenian, where they all fled to, that recalls the Armenian genocide, where thousands and thousands of Armenian women and girls were raped. And the Armenian genocide we often situate in Turkey, but this also happened in Baku, in Azerbaijan, before the 1918 pogrom or genocide. I think 43% of Baku was Christian, were Armenians, almost half of the population.
Wow.
And yeah.
Well, we see in Turkey, for example, where it was the heart of Christianity.
Yes.
Portions of the Bible are, or at least the New Testament, are in the Turkish regions. And now it's what, 98, 99% Muslim, apparently, or at least the percentage is very, very high. And we see that happening in right now before our eyes in places like Azerbaijan. Yeah.
Yes. And speaking about Turkey, I was there a few years ago, and I studied, I have a degree in Eastern Christianity. So I studied the Assyrians, the Armenians, these communities. And as you rightly say, they are in Turkey and Iraq, Syria.
Yeah.
What they told me is that on the surface, this all looks nice. But they did this. Only a small thing needs to happen, and then we all know that they will go after us again. That's all Christians there told me this.
So they live under this pressure,
All the
which
time.
we see even in the Islamic law, where a sort of second level status,
Yes.
citizenship, and a pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're being used for government propaganda.
Yeah.
Which we also see in Iran and Azerbaijan, by the way, but also in Turkey. So and in Syria today. So it's a tactic that works in the Muslim world a lot, where they, as in Azerbaijan, with the people fleeing the country, having their pictures taken. You also hear that from Turkish Christians saying that the government uses us for state propaganda.